You are now listening to the Fighting Back podcast, and here's your host, Jessica Travis.
Good afternoon. This is the Fighting Back podcast. It is episode 14. From couch to the courtroom, Dr. Jeremiah Stokes explains forensic mental health. And I am here with Dr. Jeremiah Stokes. He is the owner and clinical director of Stokes Counseling and Consulting and Restorative Mental Health Group. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jessica.
So before we get into it, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the forensic mental health services and this profession?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been practicing psychotherapy. I'm in my 15th year of practice. And throughout my career, I've worked with kids and families. And I think when you work with kids and families, by default, you sort of end up kind of getting close to the family law arena, just due to the amount of divorce and separation that's in our community. So having worked with young children and families, I found myself slowly merging into providing forensic services, specifically in the family law arena initially.
Okay. And I know with us, we do a lot of criminal defense, family law, and personal injury. And I know the mental health aspect of it really kind of flows throughout all of those practice areas.
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, I have two different organizations that I'm the owner and clinical director of, Stokes Counseling and Consulting. And within Stokes Counseling and Consulting, we provide services related to family law and some criminal law services. And then Restorative Mental Health Group is strictly personal injury. And so within those two organizations, we provide various types of testing and evaluations. And so from a family law perspective, we provide social investigations. We provide personality assessments related to parents. We provide reunification therapy. And then in the personal injury context with Restorative Mental Health Group, all of those cases are related to personal injury cases, primarily traumatic brain injuries and other PTSD-related cases associated with personal injury.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into them one by one,
Yes.
just so we can kind of talk about the different practice areas and how those mental health counseling kind of fits into it and those mental health services fit into it.
Yes, absolutely.
But you know what? Since you mentioned family law and you mentioned personal injury,
Right.
Let's start with criminal law first.
Sure.
Just kind of back it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
In the criminal defense context, what kind of treatment do you do that's related?
So when we think of forensic services, as it relates to criminal defense, criminal law, you have evaluations and then you have treatment. And so in the criminal domain, I provide primarily treatment. So I'm a treatment provider for people who are in the midst of criminal litigation. And then there are times where I will act as an expert witness in those cases.
So when we're talking about mental health treatment, is that usually when the court orders somebody to go to mental health treatment and then show proof of it?
There certainly can be court-ordered treatment. There can also be referrals from local attorneys.
Okay.
So those are usually the two domains.
I know sometimes in our criminal defense cases, we will have a mental health expert come in as far as mitigation to kind of show the why behind why something happened. Is that types of areas of practice you do as well?
Typically with criminal law, I'm really strictly, I stick to a treatment provision role. So I will provide psychotherapy or counseling. Now I will then act as a witness in some of these cases to be able to provide a clinical overview of what that individual has been going through.
Okay.
How that may affect their case. So that can include mitigating factors in my testimony.
So moving on then to family law,
Yes.
because I know that's a lot of what you do with Stokes Counseling and Consulting. So what kind of forensic mental health services do you provide specifically in that family law context?
Yeah, I would say that the family law context is where I spend most of my time. And so we provide a number of different services. Social investigations are a service that we provide.
Tell us what that are.
Okay,
what
so
that is.
social investigation is a term used in the state of Florida to describe what's nationally recognized as custody evaluations. And essentially, it's a comprehensive investigation, a comprehensive evaluation where a mental health professional will interview both parents. There will be, at times, not always, but at times, psychological testing for both parents. There's interviewing of the child. Sometimes there's psychological testing of the child. There is what we call collateral interviews, and that's where the evaluator will interview professional collaterals, and professional collaterals could be couples therapists, it could be the child's pediatrician, it could be school records. And then we also interview what we would call personal collaterals. Personal collaterals is, let's say, mom's mom or mom's sister or dad's best friend. And so we essentially, we also do home visits as well.
Okay.
Where we observe child and parent in their own environment. We take all of that data to then formulate a hypothesis about what could potentially inform the court in aiding them in making a decision as it relates to custody for the child, time sharing, decision making, things of that nature. So it's a pretty laborious, extensive evaluation process for sure.
Absolutely. And I know with cases that we've had that social investigations are involved, typically it's something where the court will order the social investigation and have us appoint the mental health provider to do that.
Yes.
Do you have any social investigations that are done when there is not a court order, just if the parties want it done, or is it always based on a court order?
So those do exist, but they're very rare to my knowledge. Any social investigation that I've been associated with in my career has been court ordered.
Okay. So I know I cut you off. Yep. Other than social investigations, can you describe the other mental health work that you do?
Yeah, so we also do, I have a psychologist on staff, Dr. Binny Singh, so she will conduct personality assessments for or other psychological testing, typically for parents. So let's say an attorney, let's say they need to just sort of get a clinical picture of a parent's personality or both parents' personalities, not necessarily a comprehensive social investigation, but just strictly psychological testing. We'll provide psychological testing. We also provide an area of expertise for me is reunification therapy.
Okay.
So reunification therapy, I also act as a consultant and a trainer of reunification therapy. So I do national and local trainings on reunification therapy. Reunification therapy is essentially a therapeutic modality that will help facilitate reconciliation between a child and a parent who have been estranged, typically throughout the process of some sort of litigation issue, something, perhaps one of the parent, there was a parental alienation, or maybe one of the parents was in jail.
Right.
The list goes on and on. So reunification therapy is the therapeutic facilitation of reconciling those parties.
And some kind of question for that. Is that something that is normally has to be ordered by the court? Or is that something that if both parents agree, the child can go into that reunification therapy without court involvement?
Yeah, I would say compared to social investigations, you can see reunification therapy happening much more often without a court order. However, through the years, I have learned that I mandate a court order.
Okay.
Reason being is that, I've found that without a court order, we don't have as much of a capacity to exercise our right as a provider the way that we need to, meaning let's say the parents agree without an order and then one parent is not compliant or doesn't participate. So I will advise attorneys, if attorneys consult with me about working with me as a reunification therapist, I will say that's great, but in the court order I need X, Y, and Z listed. Things like both parents need to comply to the recommendations of the provider, that sort of language.
Got it. So if we want to do reunification therapy, it's really better to go get the court order to have you do that.
I think so.
That makes sense.
Just because of the dysfunctionality that often exists within family systems that find themselves in that position, typically a court order is helpful.
That makes sense. I want to go back to the psychological testing that you were talking about, how you're able to test either one or both parents just to learn a little bit about their personality.
Yes.
So I know, I think it's been more common in the recent years that the word narcissism has been thrown around and how it is pretty often where one person will tell me, the other parent is a narcissist or things like that. Right. How does that come into play when you're doing that personality testing? Is there a way to diagnose what is truly narcissism as opposed to a selfish parent? And how is that done?
Absolutely. So, an evaluator is going to utilize a number of different instruments potentially. primarily personality inventories or personality assessments are tools utilized to provide a diagnosis of, say, for example, narcissistic personality disorder. So I like to tell people everyone has a healthy degree of narcissism. And then some folks
So that's a good thing.
yeah, you want a little bit of it, right?
Okay.
You want a little bit of it. And then some folks have narcissistic features. So maybe it's a little bit more of that healthy narcissism that's sort of gone in the other direction. And then people will meet criteria for what we call narcissistic personality disorder. And so that is
that's when it becomes a disorder?
That's when it becomes a disorder. And we essentially, when there's any sort of psychiatric disorder, that comes from a book called the DSM, which is Mental Health Professionals. It's essentially the book that we utilize for diagnosing any psychiatric condition. So a person who may have narcissistic features, we'll say, looks a lot different than someone who has full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. Now, I will say, narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, they are much more common, I will say, in cases where there's a lot of litigation and family law.
That is interesting to know. I did not know that.
It's there. However,
so there is a statistical correlation.
Yes. The caveat is that I would say that pretty much the majority of the parents that I work with will say their spouse is either ex-spouse is either narcissistic or has borderline personality. And it's like, well, there may be some statistical relevance, but that's not 100% the case.
And I know you probably don't know the actual statistics offhand, but are you able to give us like a range? Because for me, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, with like my clients that come in, I typically find about 60 to 75% of them will say that their ex-spouse is narcissistic.
Yes.
Do you have some type of numbers as far as people who say that versus those individuals who actually fall within the disorder?
So I would say about 75% of the clientele that we receive says that as well, if not more.
Okay.
I know there is literature out there to support hard facts on the numbers. I don't know what the data is.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. However, I will say that if a family finds themselves in a position where they need a social investigation, for example, it's not crazy to have a parent who could potentially meet criteria for one of those disorders. And I don't have hard data, but it is more prevalent, I would say, in that arena.
Okay,
certainly.
That makes sense. And kind of going along with that, since I know that narcissistic personality is usually kind of one of those common misunderstandings that we have of, this person has some of those narcissistic tendencies, they're just a little selfish versus a disorder. What are some other common misunderstandings that you see among parents, even dealing with therapy or custody evaluations or any of the services that you offer?
Some of the issues that we see?
Correct. Those misunderstandings that you see people have.
So I think a lot of times it's interpersonal conflict. I think especially when we're dealing with a family law issue, a family that finds themselves in need of a social investigation or reunification therapy, there's an interpersonal factor, meaning there's communication issues, there's difficulties with empathy, there's difficulties with encouraging the other parent to be a part of the child's life. And then oftentimes there are independent psychological issues, and whether it's an individual who meets diagnostic criteria for condition like bipolar, or maybe they have a substance abuse issue. But a lot of times it really boils down to difficulties within the interpersonal dynamic. And a lot of times when children are involved, it could just be strictly a parenting issue. Some people are just, they're not equipped to be great parents. And so families will find themselves in situations where they need intervention of mental health professionals when there's a parenting issue.
So I know this is kind of broad, but then how do your mental health services then truly help a parent in these type of high conflict custody cases?
It really varies. I mean, I think there's a couple different parts to this. First, we have to diagnose what's going on. And when I say diagnose, I don't mean strictly diagnose as in diagnosing a condition, but I use the word diagnosis more as a generalized word. We've got to be able to get in there and figure out what's going on. Is this primarily a mom issue? Is this primarily a dad issue? Is this primarily a really difficult child who has a lot going on? Is this a comprehensive family system issue? So the first part is being able to diagnose and conceptualize what exactly are those issues. And then after that, it's how do we effectively treat those issues, or how do we remedy those issues? So for example, if we're doing a social investigation, with social investigations, we will recommend things like a parent coordinator. So let's say I engage in a social investigation and I find out that a big component here are the parents' inability to communicate and to co-parent. That's going to be a case where I will typically recommend a parent coordinator. Or let's say a child has been estranged, perhaps alienated. I'll use that term. That's another controversial term, we know.
Yep.
But perhaps it's a child that's alienated, or maybe not alienated, but has just been estranged for whatever reason. We're going to recommend reunification therapy. So I think, part of it is being able to indicate factually with data what exactly is going on, provide an understanding of that, and then provide treatment options for that. And then the treatment options, then there's a whole other world of what we do depending on what we're treating and how we're treating.
And typically, if it's a situation where the parents are involved in litigation, so there is a court case, there is a divorce or custody, paternity type case that's going on, do you recommend that parents kind of go themselves to you to get those mental health services, or do you recommend that they work with the attorney and get a court order to figure out what's best suited for their needs?
I think if a family is in litigation, they should go through their attorney and get a court order. That way, the mental health professional, particularly treatment mental health professional who is working with that case, has more leverage and input in that case.
Right.
And then, of course, there's different services. If you're a parent coordinator, obviously a parent coordinator has to be appointed by the court, so there are those professionals that need to be appointed. But I think if it's gone through the legal route, if a family is in that much litigation, that correlates to the dysfunction. The more litigation a family is in my opinion, the more dysfunction the family is in.
Right.
So we might as well have that legal backing to help support the provider.
And I think, too, I agree with you, because I think if you're in that type of high conflict situation, having the court order to, in a sense, force the other parent to do what they're supposed to do, and to have that order there that says, if you don't, I'm going to the judge, we're getting sanctions on you. I think that really helps both parents cooperate when, frankly, if both parents are good at cooperating, they probably wouldn't be in a high conflict situation in the first place.
You hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, they're in that situation oftentimes, at least behaviorally, is because they're not cooperative.
Right.
They're not cooperative, whether it be with the other parent. They're not encouraging what they need to encourage out of their child. Maybe they're not even listening to their attorney, right? Typically, there's at least one parent, oftentimes both, who really struggle with that. And so the legal factor, I think, is that layer of accountability that they need.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit. And talk a little bit, because I know we don't have too much time, but I want to talk about personal injury.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's another area that you mentioned in the beginning that is really helpful for mental health services.
Yes.
So talk to me, how does mental health services that you provide and that forensic treatment really apply in those personal injury cases?
Yes, absolutely. So the second company that I own is Restorative Mental Health Group. And Restorative Mental Health Group is primarily a personal injury organization. And so what we do is we work directly. All of our patients are personal injury clients who are referred to us by attorneys, by personal injury attorneys. And in these cases, these are people who have obviously experienced, vast degree of accidents, and they are in need of mental health treatment. And so the treatment that we provide a couple different services. We provide various psychiatric evaluations. We also provide traumatic brain injury evaluations, which is very important because, and so Dr. Rebecca Vilar is our neuropsychologist who provides those evaluations, because let's say you've had someone who is in a serious accident, and we want to be able to provide data, objective data that there has been, in fact, a traumatic brain injury. An evaluation is very helpful. But we also have a team of psychotherapists who provide what we would call trauma-informed therapy for these individuals. And so
that's really interesting, because a lot of times when people think about personal injury,
right,
they think, okay, I got into a car accident and now my back hurts.
Right.
And now I need to get treatment for that physical injury.
Yes.
But I know in working with personal injury clients, there's a lot of that emotional injury and trauma that goes along with it that sometimes they don't even realize.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think if someone is physically injured, and let's say they're not moving around well, let's say they can't go to work. I mean, it essentially holistically impacts every area of their life. Thus, it's going to have a psychological and emotional impact. Even if they don't meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a stress-related issue. It's a traumatic-related issue. And so it really it gets in the way of their functioning psychologically and emotionally. And what we found, this organization, it's a great thing because we're seeing that there hasn't been a lot of referrals from PI attorneys for psychotherapy, but there's a desperate need.
Because I think, too, a lot of attorneys, when I talk to my attorney colleagues, a lot of them don't realize the psychological aspect of getting injured or being in that situation. I know some of my clients are like, I'm afraid to drive now. Like every time I get into a car and drive, I'm like freaking out. I have a panic attack. That's real. That's
real. And what a great example. Let's say someone gets in a car accident and they develop a driving phobia per se, right?
Right.
And so it's like, they need to work with the psychological healthcare provider to help work through that, because their inability to drive is then going to prevent them from picking up their kid from soccer practice or perhaps going to work or whatever the case may be. So I think it's, I would encourage personal injury attorneys to think holistically, mind and body, as they say.
Yes.
And trying to create a remedy for their clients.
And I mean, part of what we do as the attorneys is making sure that our clients get the most compensation that they can for those injuries.
Yes.
And if we're ignoring part of their health,
right,
their mental health, and those injuries that go along with it, not just the physical injuries, I think as attorneys too, we're missing out on those injuries that need to be compensated.
Absolutely. Because I think they're just as valid and legitimate in many cases, maybe not all cases, but in many cases, they're just as legitimate as the physical issues.
And I think too, when we're talking personal injury, not only do I have clients that are in an auto accident or that are in a slip and fall, but a lot of times I have people come to me who have had some type of trauma inflicted on them.
Yes.
Either an assault or a battery or some type of sexual battery that has happened, that they may not have what you would consider, really terrible, long-lasting injuries from that, say, sexual assault.
Right.
But they have got really traumatic injuries.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the personal injury attorneys are, you guys are already advocates, right? But I think from a mental health perspective, this is where personal injury attorneys can really act as advocates. Because let's say an individual is maybe they're fearful of going and seeing a mental health professional. Maybe they just don't know. And so I think, personal injury attorneys have the capacity to continue that advocacy role by encouraging their clients to seek out mental health care.
Absolutely. So I did want to talk a little bit about boundaries because I love boundaries.
Boundaries are good.
Boundaries are good. But really more of like the client role with a therapist or with a mental health provider.
Yes.
So I know with us, as attorneys, when we represent a client, like we represent that client. Like we are biased in favor of that client. Everything we're going to do for our client's benefit, no matter what.
Right.
So our role and boundaries are pretty clear. We know who we are in favor for.
That's right.
But when it comes to a mental health professional, there's therapy, there's treatment, there's assessment. Yeah. And I think the role of a mental health provider differs depending on those different areas, right?
It certainly does. I think just generally, if we were to compare the mental health profession from the legal profession, there's a different set of boundaries altogether. I think it just looks different, right? When an attorney comes on the case, like they are in it, they are for their client, right?
We are fighting.
You're fighting, right? Mm-hmm. Literally, you're fighting.
Yeah.
And then I think within the mental health world, when it comes to forensic services, there's two different arenas. There's evaluation, which is it's essential to have no bias. Like when you're doing social investigations, I would say that you're getting questioned about your bias, right? I mean, if let's say you conduct a social investigation that is in favor, in quotes, in favor of one parent, you're going to. There's a strong chance that bias. The idea of you being biased is going to be projected onto you from an attorney. So it's really important for you in an evaluative role to be very mindful of the potentiality for bias. I think in a treatment provision role.
And let me just stop you for a second, because even in court, part of what you're doing when you're testifying is you want the judge to believe what you are saying.
Right.
And if the judge thinks that you're biased in any way for or against one side, they're going to take that into account for your credibility.
Absolutely.
So you have to do everything to make it so that you are not biased in favor of one side or the other, so a judge believes you.
It's vital. I mean, it's foundational, I think, particularly when it comes to evaluations and assessments. It's absolutely vital. I think when it comes to treatment provision, it looks a little different. You know, if you're a treatment provider, I still think there's professional boundaries, but I think bias shows up a little different, because I think it's hard for a psychotherapist who's been let's say, you know, you've been treating someone for 3 years, you know, and you're getting their perspective.
Right.
And where we see this a lot in family law is individual therapists who are not trained in the family law arena, who are just providing care to one parent. And so let's say I'm a provider who has no training in family law, and one parent comes to me and gives me their narrative of their experience.
Right.
I'm trained to just attune to you, to be empathic, to be compassionate of your situation. I haven't heard anything from the other side. Right. And so I think it gets a lot more complicated when you're providing care. But if you're providing care that's court-ordered treatment, you have to understand how bias shows up.
So is it, because I know that you're with Stokes Counseling and Consulting and with Restorative Mental Health Group, you're doing a combination of both, right?
Right.
You're doing treatment in some areas, but you're also doing testing and evaluation and assessments.
Right.
So how do you have that conversation with the person beforehand to kind of let them know, hey, this is the path we're going on. This is our boundaries and our biases?
Absolutely. I think, you know, going back to, because social investigations are such a tangible example, you know, at the beginning of a social investigation, I will tell an individual that, you know, my role, I'm not in a treatment provider role here. This is, you know, my role is to investigate and evaluate your family dynamic and your co-parenting situation, et cetera. So I'm, you know, like I'll have parents, like let's say I'm doing a social investigation, I'll have a parent call me in my office and ask, this happened with my child, as if they want me to give them advice and consultation.
Right.
And I'll say, well,
as if they think that you are their therapist.
Exactly. And I'll have my admin staff tell them to tell mom or dad to call their therapist.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's good that you are laying out what those roles are and what those boundaries are. I think communication is important so that the person knows, you know, that you're not their therapist.
Yes.
They can't come to you for those questions and need that.
Yeah, I think we have an ethical duty to do that. We have an ethical duty to be communicative about boundaries. I think it's something that when you're providing optimal services, that's what you have to do.
So I guess to wrap it up, I wanted to ask, if you had a key piece of advice to clients who are going through criminal, family law, personal injury type of situation, about how to work effectively with a mental health professional, what kind of advice would that be?
I think the first thing is to be able to be introspective and reflective regarding your situation. You know, so what are you going through, not only as it relates to the legal perspective, but what's happening for you psychologically. And then I think the next step is that if you have an attorney, is to consult with your attorney about a professional who can provide services that are specifically geared towards what you're going through from a psychological perspective, or whatever your needs are. If not, you know, searching online is always, you know, depending on what you're looking for. So let's say you're going through a family law issue, consult with your attorney. But then if there's something that you know what you're looking for, to search for that specifically and to find individuals who are trained in these domains. That's, I think critical. But I think through it all, upholding your maintaining your mental health, prioritizing your mental health should be a top priority.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know, we have lists of providers who work with different areas of the law that we will often recommend to clients.
Yes.
If they're going through this thing, they need to talk to this person. If they're going here, they need to talk to that one. I know we use a network of really important providers for all aspects of the law.
Yes.
That we work with. And I think the good thing with the attorneys is that we've vetted. Right.
Yes.
So we've looked into you. We know your work. We know that you're going to be capable credible in front of a judge,
Yes.
do the work that needs to be done. And I think sometimes that is better than just going online and kind of seeing who pops up first
Yes.
on the Google search.
Absolutely. 100% consult with your attorney first. And then if it's something that you can maybe handle on your own, or that you're comfortable handling on your own, making sure that individual has training in that particular area. But yeah, absolutely consult with your attorney, because you have vetted those providers, certainly.
Absolutely. Well, so any listeners who would like to engage your services or learn more about Stokes Counseling and Consulting or Restorative Mental Health Group, how can they get a hold of you?
Yes. So our website, stokescounselingandconsulting.com, particularly if you're going through any sort of family law issue. And then if there is any sort of personal injury issue or traumatic related issue, restorativementalhealthgroup.com.
Well, thank you so much,
Yes.
Dr. Stokes, for coming here today and talking with me. This has been really interesting and informative, so I really appreciate
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
it. All right.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this episode helpful or informative, don't forget to follow us on social media and share this podcast with your friends. Like, follow, subscribe so you never miss a show, and help others know their rights by spreading the word. Your support helps us keep fighting back. The information provided in the Fighting Back podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as legal advice. Every case is unique and should be reviewed by a qualified attorney who can provide guidance based on the specific facts and circumstances of your case. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship with Fighter Law or any of its attorneys. If you are facing any legal issue, we strongly encourage you to consult with a licensed attorney directly.